10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Coming to you live as Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, this is going to be a most interesting session given all that's going on and all of the shallow and misleading spin you hear about it.
Man, we thought things were crazy before. A party calling for their presidential nominee, incumbent president, to drop out. Now we've added an assassination attempt to the mix. That's as wild as it gets. But where do you want to start off today, Dad?
I want to start off with what I heard at the Republican convention. Now, I have a forthcoming book. It's called The Truth About Conservatism. It's Not What You Think. And the thesis of the book, which should be out in about 6 months, is that what conservatives proclaim is not what they really believe and doesn't jibe with the way they act. Speaker after speaker said, the Republican Party is the party of law and order. And yet who is their presidential candidate that they are united behind? The only former president, the only major party presidential candidate to be convicted of felonies, in this case, 34 felonies. He was found by a civil jury to have sexually assaulted, colloquially raped, and defamed a woman. He was found by a civil jury to have engaged in massive financial fraud. His companies were found criminally to have engaged in massive financial fraud. He was twice impeached. In the Senate trial for the second impeachment, it was the only time that a substantial number of the members of the impeached president's own party voted for conviction. And even the Republicans who didn't vote for conviction said, this is a matter for the criminal justice system to deal with. Of course, they've now changed their tunes. He also faces criminal indictments for January 6th in D.C., for violating our national security in Florida, and for also trying to overturn the election in Georgia. This is supposedly the party of law and order. The hypocrisy is thick enough to cut with a butter knife. They also said, we are the party who is going to tell you the truth.
Let me interrupt for a second. Don't you think it's boring to just go through this laundry list of all these transgressions of Trump?
No, because we are right at the cusp of the Republican convention, and this is their central message, their central theme. And I think it's really important to remind everyone how much of a fundamental contradiction this is between what they claim and what's actually going on in the Republican Party. They've also said, we're the party of truth. We're the only ones who are going to tell you the truth. Well, Trump's entire debate was based on lies. One lie every minute and 20, 30 seconds of speaking time. Huge lies about January 6th, about the 2020 election, about Roe versus Wade, about inflation. And yet, with a straight face, they claim they're the party, the only party that's going to tell you the truth. There's always hypocrisy in politics on, Republicans and Democrats. But I've never seen anything in my 77 years this blatant. Now, what everyone wants to know is what's going on politically with these crazy events, the Democrats slitting their own throat out in public, trying to push their incumbent president and their duly elected nominee. Who made Biden the nominee? Was it members of Congress? Was it political operatives? Was the New York Times editorial board, Sam?
Well, if they voted, yes. No, generally speaking, it was the 2020 primary and then the 2024 primary.
Democratic voters, 87% voted for Biden. And yet all these self-proclaimed, political movers and shakers are now trying to push the duly chosen nominee out, who also happens to be the sitting president. And what all of these critics share is they have zero track record in predicting elections and yet they claim to know what the Democrats should be doing to become predicted winners. In fact, they are leading the Democrats publicly right down the primrose path to a likely defeat.
But this is pretty much ended at this point. I mean, you don't really hear. They had that whole conference, and all the Democrats in Congress came out and said, "We're with Joe. We're with Joe. We're with Joe." So you're not really hearing the loudness that you heard before, right?
Well, let's hope. That could be revived again. And I've seen stories today that while the Democrats, publicly have toned down their anti-Biden rhetoric, they're still behind the scenes trying to push him out.
Let's talk a little bit about the Trump assassination, because that's happened since we've been live. I think the question on everybody's mind is, how will this affect the election? Will it affect the election at all? Obviously, based on your keys, it seems to me like this could potentially change either the challenger charisma key, social unrest, maybe third party. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. We've heard a lot of pontificating from the pundits again, who have no scientific basis for anything, giving us their instant analysis of how this would affect the race. You can take all of that, all of these pundits and journalists and self-proclaimed experts, and take their material and do with it what the British philosopher David Hume said, do to works of superstition. Consign them to the flames. These instant analyses are worthless. Remember, they all told us after the Access Hollywood tape, Sam, right? Donald Trump was dead. He can never win. After Barack Obama had a disastrous debate, his first debate with Mitt Romney, when only 20% in the CNN polls thought he won, compared to 33% who thought Biden won, the pundits said Obama's finished, he can't win. When George H.W. Bush in 1988 fell 17 points behind his rival Democrat Mike Dukakis in the late spring of '88, all the pundits said he's finished, he can't win. Of course, at every one of those instances, the keys to the White House had the opposite view and were correct. Now, while it is conceivable that the assassination indirectly can affect
the assassination attempt. He's still alive.
As far as we know.
Well,
yes.
I
haven't seen it turn a key. It's not social unrest. It's not, millions of people out on the street. It's not a threat to the survival and stability of the country. It doesn't make Donald Trump charismatic because the response has been so polarized. He still appeals only to a narrow base, and who knows how it may affect RFK Jr., maybe positively, maybe negatively. But here is something extremely important that all the commentary has missed or gotten wrong. Violence is endemic in America, including political violence. This is as old as the Republic. But this attempted assassination and tragedy was fundamentally different from any other successful or attempted assassination. Those were all targeted to the individual president or presidential candidate or president-elect. This was a mass shooting with multiple deaths and injuries. And sadly, the big lesson here is that mass shootings are as common in America as the sunrise. We have a mass shooting every single day with multiple victims in America. More mass shootings in America by far than all of our NATO allies combined. Just the day after the tragedy in Pennsylvania, there was another mass shooting that claimed 7 lives. And nobody paid any attention because we've become inured to this gun violence that's unique to the United States. And mass shootings are the tip of the iceberg. 40 Americans per day are murdered by guns. An American per capita is 20 times more likely to be murdered by a gun than residents of our closest peer democracies. If any good is going to come out of this, it would be finally, at long last, to have a record of gun violence, which also, by the way, has now become a main killer of our children. And we have a model for this. And that is when Ronald Reagan was shot, his press secretary, who was standing near him, James Brady, a staunch Republican, was grievously wounded. Instead of seeking revenge or trying to promote political advantage, he decided that he would lead the struggle to deal with gun violence. And James Brady and his wife succeeded in what is to date the only major national initiatives to deal with gun violence. The assault weapons ban, which has now lapsed, and by the way, I understand the tragedy in Pennsylvania was by an assault weapon, and the Brady bill for background checks. You know, we've heard a lot of talk about unity. Well, empty talk about unity means nothing. As the Brady example shows, if you are going to have unity, it's got to be on something substantive. Can't just be air. And it's got to be something that works for the good of all Americans. Let us follow the James Brady model following this tragedy.
Okay. Other big news is J.D. Vance has become Trump's running mate. What are your thoughts on that?
Not a big surprise. You know, they say converts are the strongest loyalists. J.D. Vance used to be an extreme Trump critic, said Trump was poison, was a danger to the country, even compared him to dictators. J.D. Vance, over time, has changed his tune and has become a devoted MAGA and one of the strongest sycophants of Donald Trump. So in effect, with J.D. Vance, Donald Trump has duplicated, replicated himself, kind of a younger version, but someone who mirrors everything that Donald Trump also represents. And politically, it's not, consequential. There is no vice presidential key. Vice presidential nominations don't affect the outcome of an election. But this is even an attempt to try to win over a swing state. Vance is from Ohio. No chance Ohio is going to go Democratic. He didn't pick someone like Marco Rubio from Florida, which leans Republican, but is much more of a swing state. But the great danger to all of us is that J.D. Vance is a climate denier along with Donald Trump. That means a Trump-Vance presidency is going to drill and dig and burn fossil fuels, and rather than combat the catastrophic climate change that we see right before our eyes, with the disaster in Texas, a terrible storm, people having no power, the wildfires, the droughts, the tornadoes, the floods. It's no longer a theory. It's here. And we now have two deniers on the Republican ticket who, if elected, are going to pose an existential threat to our well-being on this planet. One more big news, right, Sam?
I don't know.
Out of Florida.
Oh, the documents case.
Yes. So this was the most documents case. I hate to call it that. The media has downplayed all these cases, calling the New York case the hush money case. Wasn't on trial for paying hush money, but for defrauding the electorate and the government. It's not a documents case. It's a national security case. He's accused of violating one of our highest laws to protect our national security, the Espionage Act. Once you take those national security confidential, top secret documents, and you put them in an insecure location, no matter what you do with them, you have compromised our national security, because the entire national security team has got to assume that those documents are compromised. And all our national security operations have to be reviewed and revised. So we have this judge who was brutally slapped down by the conservative 11th Circuit already for outlandish rulings. She sat on the case for a year, just diddled, did almost nothing, playing right into the hands of Donald Trump, whose strategy is always delay, delay, delay. He claims, I've done nothing wrong, I'm innocent, but he's done everything in his power to avoid going into court and proving that he did nothing wrong and was innocent. Now, after a year's delay, Judge Cannon has dismissed the entire case on an outlandish fringe theory that has been only put forward by the very compromised judge on the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas. The theory is that the appointment of the special prosecutor, Jack Smith, was illegal. This notion has been reviewed by court after court, including much higher courts than the federal district court, and every court that's looked at it has utterly rejected the notion that a special prosecutor who has not been appointed by the president and approved by the Senate is somehow illegal. Only Judge Cannon has embraced this theory. In addition, Judge Cannon, and this I know because I'm an historian, has flied in the face of the whole precedent historically of the use of special prosecutors. Conservative jurists tell us it's critically important to respect the history and tradition of this country when we make our decisions. Well, the history and tradition of this country has been the use of special prosecutors to fight corruption for 150 years. What Judge Cannon does not recognize is the first special prosecutor, who was not someone approved by the Senate, was appointed in the 1870s to investigate the corruption in the Grant administration. We had special prosecutors in the 1920s to investigate the Teapot Dome scandal that led to the first cabinet member, Albert Fall, the Secretary of Interior, being jailed for taking bribes. And of course, we all know we've had special prosecutors for the Watergate scandal, the Iran-Contra scandal, the Clinton scandal, all of the Donald Trump scandals. So what she's done, I can tell you with expertise, is fly in the face of the whole history of special prosecutors and undermined a critical tool to fight corruption in this country.
You had a lot to say today, huh?
I sure do, because I know a lot about the history of special prosecutors, and this judge knows nothing.
Aha, got him.
And we have almost 3,400 viewers.
Correct.
That's pretty good, right?
That's better than 200, 400.
You're like a math genius.
Yeah. I apologize to everybody if the internet connection is not very good. I don't know why. I'm connected to Ethernet, and it's going from 10,000 kbps to 0. I have no idea why it's happening.
Did I just blow hard and no one heard what I said?
No, they heard.
All right. I have one more thing to say.
Oh.
And then we'll get to our audience. But this is a query for our audience. I'm not a forensic expert. I'm not a police and security expert. But I was shocked that the Secret Service let Donald Trump pop up and raise his fist, expose his head, when if there was a second shooter, he was a sitting duck target. I've watched lots of other incidents. Never has the Secret Service ever let anyone get exposed. I can't comment anymore. I'm not an expert, but I wonder if we have experts in our audience who can enlighten me on this.
Yeah, there was a lot of strange things that happened during that assassination attempt. Both sides are using the strange things to fuel conspiracies.
What? If there's one phrase I would eliminate from the English language, it's both sides. Yes, you do have fringe people on the left who are making conspiracy theories. Fringe people who no one cares about.
Right.
But the top leadership of the Republican Party is baselessly blaming this on President Biden and the Democrats. That includes the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, President Trump's two sons, Don Jr. and Eric, Representatives Collins and Green of Georgia. You can't compare that to some fringes on the left who have nothing to do with the mainstream of the Democratic Party. That's the fundamental difference here.
That's a fair point. I'm just saying there's a lot of question marks that, you know, need to be answered. The Secret Service seemed to screw up. Why did he pop it? Yeah. But you even told me, you know, there's a lot of questions even still surrounding JFK's. There's no answers to that. We may never get a lot of the answers.
We may never get the answers. But everything we know shows that this Crooks guy had nothing to do with Joe Biden or the Democrats. Yes, 3 years ago he had contributed $15 to a Democratic group, but since then he was a registered Republican and a gun devotee. He had a T-shirt for a website that promoted the most deadly of firearms. His neighbors said until recently he had a Trump sign. So there's nothing connecting this guy to Joe Biden or the Democratic Party, or really anything political, one way or the other.
All right, you ready to get to some questions?
Yes, or some enlightenment, either one.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
How would anybody know the answer to that question?
If they were a forensic expert, they would know more than me anyway. But that's fair. We may never know.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to know the answer to that question. Matt Jacobson says, Dr. L, you oppose changing your model on the fly. However, pattern recognition technology is better now than in the 80s. Why not refine the keys with newer tech and maybe just a few election outcomes post-1984?
You know, I've been asked that many times, and the keys go all the way back to 1860, the horse and buggy days when Abe Lincoln was elected. So they survived 160 years of American presidential elections, and they've worked. You know, there's an old saying, you probably heard this, Sam, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so far, I have no reason, based on, you know, one or two additional elections, to change a system that's based on 160 years and dozens of elections. And I understand, you know, we have all kinds of fancy technology, but the beauty of the keys is they're so simple. You know, we have all these complicated economic and political science models that no one can understand. We have the polls, which are snapshots and are abused as predictors, but we have the keys, which are simple, integral parameters that have worked for 160 years and that anyone can use and understand.
Still Alive says, I recall last week you said Biden knows about your keys. Do you at all suspect that Biden is staying in despite the intense media pressure due to his knowledge of your key model?
Well,
no way.
I wish that were true. I have no way of knowing one way or the other, but I do know that his closest advisor, Ron Klain, is someone I've known for decades, and it is a very strong devotee of the keys. So I don't know what Klain has been telling Biden, but he may have been telling him a lot about the keys. But I can't claim that. I'd love to, but to be honest, I can't.
It could be a factor. I would be surprised if it was the only factor.
I agree. It wouldn't be the only factor, but it might be a factor.
I want to give some shout outs to Jay Saul, Pragmatic, Peggy Dempsey, and Arlen Cohen for becoming members. I Love Avatar 003 says, how were you able to predict Reagan in 1982 so early when things were going so badly?
Yeah. And by the way, I'm glad to see we have new members. Please join. It costs less per month than a milkshake. And please keep those donations coming. I don't take a penny of any of this. But if you want to keep us on the air, particularly for 2 days a week, we need the memberships and we need the donations. And that's a great question. And sometimes the keys do fall into place early, and sometimes they don't. And that was an incredibly audacious prediction in April 1982 because the nation was mired in the worst depression since the Great Depression at that time. And Ronald Reagan's approval ratings were down in the gutter, no better than Jimmy Carter's, the one-term president. But I could foresee that the keys would fall into place by 1984, that the economy would recover, that there wouldn't be grand social unrest, that Ronald Reagan would emerge as the great communicator. So I only really saw three keys falling. But I did get an amazing invitation by the political director of the Ronald Reagan White House, Lee Atwater, who invited me to come down to the White House. I spent the whole day there, met everyone, but he didn't bring me to the White House, introduce me to George H.W. Bush. At the end of the day, he looked me in the eye and he said, what would happen if Ronald Reagan didn't run again? Perfectly reasonable question. Age was viewed differently then. He was in early 70s. 60% of the American people thought he was too old to run again. And I said to Lee Atwater, look what would happen if Ronald Reagan didn't run again. You're down three keys by my calculation, a sure win. You lose the incumbency key, you're down 4. You lose the contest key because Bush and Kemp and Robertson will fight like crazy. You're now down 5. Incumbent charisma without the Gipper, forget it. You know, these guys are about as charismatic as a Passaic shopping center on Sunday morning. So if Reagan doesn't run again, you go from 3 keys down and a win to 6 keys down and a loss. Lee Atwater looks me in the eye, breathes a huge sigh of relief, says, thank you so much, Professor Lichtman, and the rest is history.
Biden just said he will soon be proposing a few reforms to the Supreme Court, according to the Washington Post. What do you think? Did you see that?
I'm all for it, but I think it's going to be impossible to get any kind of reform, even minimal ethics standards, through the Republican-controlled House, who don't seem to care whatsoever about a severely compromised court that has plunged in its public approval. You know, Republicans are trumpeting how low Joe Biden's approval rating is. Well, the Supreme Court's rating is just as bad, and that's unusual. Usually the Supreme Court is the most esteemed of the branches of government, but that's now been destroyed. And remember, the Supreme Court has no power. What the Supreme Court depends upon is the legitimacy of his rulings, and it's undermining that right now.
As he takes a sip of his soda.
Why not?
Thank you, Ruben Nunez, for your donation. Thank you, Darren Brown, for becoming a member. I looked this up on Wikipedia, but there's a chart there showing that you have Abe Lincoln as false for the charisma key. Was he really not charismatic in his day, like we all think retrospectively?
He really wasn't. He was only retrospectively charismatic. He was reviled in his own day. And until there were Union victories, very late, it's the only time anything late has changed the keys, changed the prediction. In September and October, even members of his own party were considering bouncing Lincoln from the nomination.
Good old Abe, right, Dad?
Yes.
Thank you, Randall Lambert, for becoming a member. Starling Reese says, you may have covered this last week, but how much weight does the expansion and strength of NATO help Key 11?
I don't see it as, at this point, helping Key 11. It's not really in the public consciousness. I think it's a very good thing, but to turn the key, it's got to really be something splashy that affects the public consciousness, along with something that is substantively important for America's national security. Both.
Alex19881 says, had Bernie Sanders been the Democratic nominee for president back in 2016, would he have still predicted that Trump would win the general election?
That wouldn't have changed anything. No key would have changed because there still would have been a big contest. So no.
Thank you, Dong Pan, for your donation. Rodrigo Morales says, hello, Professor. Right now, how are the 4 shaky keys looking? Which way are they currently leaning?
They really haven't changed since we looked at the last time. Probably the third party slightly leans Democratic. We don't know how the attempted assassination and mass shooting will affect the third party, but we have no way of knowing. Social unrest leans slightly Democratic. We haven't had a new and significant outburst. Remains to be seen what might happen at the Democratic convention, but it would have to be something major. The shakiest keys, as we've already explained, are foreign/military failure and foreign/military success, which depends upon, very dire situations in the Middle East and Ukraine.
Member Patrick Murray is asking about the Trump's case being dismissed in Florida. What happens if the appeal reaches the Supreme Court?
God only knows what might happen if the appeal reaches the Supreme Court. They have shown a tendency to do whatever is necessary to help out Donald Trump. And as outlandish as the idea is that Jack Smith was illegally appointed, which would mean, so many other special prosecutors were illegally appointed. Who knows what the Supreme Court might do? But there are alternatives for the Democrats. They could refile the case so they don't get to the Supreme Court in D.C. or in Miami, or they could refile the case with not a special prosecutor, but a regular prosecutor. So there are lots of options here, but the chances of this getting to trial before the election is virtually nil.
The Alex Treefire, our good friend, says, now the, quote, incredible Adam Schiff is saying that we'll lose if Biden does not drop out. Can you shut him up?
I wish I could shut him up. I wish I could shut up every one of these spineless Democrats who have no idea how to predict elections, who are slitting their own throat. And as you say, Sam, making maybe the worst communication mistake of our times, right?
Correct.
By doing all of this out in public. Why should, ordinary voters have faith in Biden if his own Democratic members of the House and the Senate don't have faith in him? Talk about trying to perpetuate a fulfilling prophecy. It is just astonishing to me. I've always talked about the Democrats being spineless. Well, now they've shown themselves to be akin to earthworms.
Got him. Got him.
Let's hope. Hey, look at that. We have 4,200 viewers. Is that a record?
Maybe.
Yeah, we're doing well.
We're doing well, folks. Thank you.
Keep those questions coming and keep the donations and memberships coming.
And thank them just for watching.
We love it when you watch, and we love your questions. And as you know, you're not getting the usual spin here. You're not getting shallow answers. We're really, telling it straight as best we can.
Member James Lagruda says, do you think this weekend's tragedy has helped Biden as calls for him to step down have taken a back seat, at least for the moment?
Probably.
Yeah, probably.
Probably so, yeah. It's, as Rosanna Dana, the great late comedian, once said, there's always something, and the conversation continually changes. The situations change. That's why polls are so unreliable. And, all of these instant analysts, this is really going to hurt the Democrats. It's going to make Trump look like a martyr. It's going to be great for Republicans. There have been a couple of polls since the assassination attempt, and they don't show any change.
Dejeen Dareen, thank you for your donation. They say, will your Truth About Conservatism book be available in audio format via Audible?
I don't control that, but I've had a lot of people ask me about getting my books on Audible. And when I have the opportunity, which will be in the next couple of weeks, I will talk to my publishers about that. But it's not in my control, but I can ask.
You got to get your books on Audible for sure.
I totally agree. Some of them are, and I want to get the most recent on Audible.
I'll read them.
You'll even read them if they're on Audible. Mm-hmm. That's astounding.
No, I'm saying I'll do the voiceover for them.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah,
or you could do it.
On one of my books, I did, I think it was The Rise of the American Conservative Movement. I did the intro, but they had a professional do the rest.
William Dang says, do you have updates on RFK Jr. polling, which could affect Key 4, the third party?
I don't. I haven't seen any updates. But, up to this time, he's been all over the map. I've seen him as low as 3, and as high as 12.
80 Mart says, if polling doesn't improve for Biden by the time it's time for the election, does that mean it's over for Biden? Recent polls show him down by 6.
I haven't seen any recent poll showing him down by 6. The most recent poll came out, I think, yesterday or today, had it as a dead heat. 46 Trump, 45 Biden, and it didn't change much when you throw in the other candidates whose polling is extremely unreliable. We also had a Georgia poll that came out today, and Biden had been well behind in Georgia. This poll showed him in striking distance, just 3 points behind. And by the way, remember, all of the polling in 2016 led the pundits to declare victory for Hillary Clinton. The most eminent polling group, that of Princeton University professors, headed by the great Professor Sam Wang, had Hillary Clinton at 99% chance to win. Sam Wang even said he'd eat a bug on national television if she lost, and to his credit, he did.
Have you ever eaten a bug?
I've never had to.
There you go.
And I don't intend to.
Mike DeNicholas says, hey, Allan, I was wondering, could a speech by Trump at the RNC, if it projects unity, flip the charisma key?
I don't see that. Already, Trump on Truth Social has reverted back to all his own old inflammatory rhetoric. Democrats are out to get me. This was after the Judge Cannon decision. It's a witch hunt. I've done nothing wrong. It's all my opponents. I take responsibility. I'm kind of riffing on this. I take responsibility for nothing. None of the indictments had anything to do with me. It's all my opponents. So, and we heard Don Jr. We heard Eric Trump mouth a lot of the same things. And we also heard from the Republicans at the convention throwing out the old red meat to their followers. No real attempt at finding common ground with Democrats.
Cameron, I think we've answered your question about the charisma key and Trump. Well, he also wants to know, why didn't the debate flip the scandal key?
Debates are not scandals.
Has to be corruption by a president. We've answered that.
We've been through it. And again, Barack Obama had a worse debate. 20% thought he won, 33% thought Biden won, and that sample was skewed towards Republicans. But to listen to the media, the utterly irresponsible media, you would think nobody thought Biden won the debate.
Everybody hates the media, man. The right hates the media. The left hates the media. Blue-collar people hate the media. Center-left Democrats hate the media. Centrists hate the media. Everybody hates the media.
But I have good reason.
Oh, okay.
I'm not just knee-jerk.
Harry wants to know, how applicable is your key system to elections outside the U.S.?
Yeah, I've answered that many times. I'll give you the short answer. The keys cannot just be automatically applied to another country, but the methodology could be used to develop individual keys for individual countries by someone who has enough knowledge of history and politics in those countries.
Eric Karstensen says, hey, Allan, do you think 2024 is echoing 1948, since in both cases the media greatly underestimated the incumbent president?
I do think it is, and I talked about that in my debate with this guy from the Young Turks, Cenk. Like Biden, Truman had low approval ratings, even lower, and there was a survey of the top 40 pundits at the time. And how many of those pundits thought that Truman would win, Sam?
None.
And all the polls showed Truman well behind. Not only did Truman win, he won handily by almost 5 percentage points, overwhelmingly in the Electoral College. And he brought with him a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. 2 years earlier, in the midterm elections, the Democrats had lost both houses. The 48 election brought it all back. So that's a good analogy. I like that.
Soccer Guy 325 says, hey, Allan, is it possible that even if Biden secures the keys, his unprecedented weakness as a candidate may be enough to have him lose anyways?
First of all, I don't know what basis we have for saying he's unprecedentedly weak. We just talked about Truman, who nobody thought was strong enough to win in terms of the so-called political experts. In 1988, when George H.W. Bush fell behind Michael Dukakis by 17 points, the pundits were saying he's such a weak candidate. He can't possibly win. He can't complete a sentence. He called Dan Rather Barbara on national television. He reminds every woman of the first boyfriend she had ever dumped. The Democrats said, Bush is such a bad candidate, we'll leave the country if we lost to this guy. Not only did Bush win, he won overwhelmingly against Mike Dukakis in '88. Now, all of that said, the keys are based on history. They're very robust. They go back to the election of Abe Lincoln. But I'm not so arrogant to say patterns of history can never, ever be broken, that you couldn't have something so cataclysmic, so outside of the last 160 years, that it could shake up elections outside the keys. I'm not Mike Johnson, who claims the Almighty speaks to him. Did you hear his speech? He said, no, your rights don't come from, laws or the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. They come right from God, as if he knows, that God somehow speaks to him. And that couldn't be much comfort to the 25% of Americans who are not religious, to those who are not Christians or don't share his nationalist view of Christianity. But I don't have that kind of access to the Almighty. I only go with history.
Member Chris Walls says, are the keys to the Senate you developed with Keilis-Borok informative for House races, or are these races too different? I was wondering about your attempt at keys to governor races.
I'm very impressed. I haven't used those keys in 30 or more years. They work pretty well for Senate. Look, I had one set of keys for 50 different Senate elections. Very hard to do. And I got about 85 to 90% right. But what do you think everyone focused on, Sam?
The ones you got wrong.
Right. So I haven't used that, I don't think, since the 1990s. And certainly it would be much more difficult to apply it to, 400 plus House races.
Yeah. El vlog de Luis Enrique. Say that.
What's that?
Say El vlog de Luis Enrique.
No, I'm not going to try to say that.
They say Biden's chances of winning are lower than ever. The forecasters have him below 25% of victory, with exception of FiveThirtyEight polls. Trump's plus the debate, plus Trump's assassination attempts. Do you really still think Biden can win?
Of course. Look, you want to go with the pollsters, the forecasters, and the pundits? Remember, they drove us down the primrose path of error in 2016. They not only didn't give Trump a 25% chance, the most eminent gave him a 1% chance to win, and he still won. In 2012, the polls swung 12 points after Obama's disastrous first debate with Romney, from Romney being down 8 among likely voters to being up 4. And of course, those same forecasters wrote off Obama. And I was right on the keys in all of those elections. I also talked about the H.W. Bush 1988 election. So you want to go with the conventional forecasters? Good luck.
Got him. Thank you, Formetta, for your donation. I think we answered that question. MD says, I'm tired of having to defend the keys to people, but critics keep claiming that it did not predict the popular vote in 2016. Can you tell everyone the keys were always meant to pick the winners?
There was no distance. It's all in my book. I don't want to have to go through it. We've already explained this many times. It's all in my book, which is now available. When I first developed the keys, there was no daylight between the popular vote and the winner. But in recent elections, that has changed, not because of the keys, but because of a fundamental change in our demography. It's much bigger than anything involving the keys, where Democrats pile up 5+ million votes in just New York and California. And what does that count for in the Electoral College?
Nada.
Right. So like other forecasters, I just predict victories. No point predicting the popular vote. In the last 30 years, how many times have Republicans won the popular vote, Sam?
Once.
Once, barely in 2004.
Thank you, Renan, for becoming a member. If Kamala replaces Biden and still gets mandate and incumbency keys, wouldn't she also get incumbency and likely mandate keys next election too?
Well, she can't get the mandate key for this election because that's already been lost. It's based upon the 2022 midterm results. And unless she's the sitting president, she's not going to secure the incumbency or the contest keys.
I'm not entirely sure what this question means, but Formeto What asks, how will this affect the election in the future? Will it cause the support for Biden to collapse?
What's the it?
I don't know. That's why I said I'm not sure.
Yeah,
what the
well,
question
there's
is.
no indication support for Biden is collapsing. And as I said, all of those instant analyses, these snap judgments are absolutely worthless. On the one hand, you can say, yes, this, can help Trump. He looks strong and defiant. He could be a martyr. On the other hand, you can say, Trump's gesture just shows once again, it's a Mussolini type gesture. It shows once again his intention to govern as a strongman, as an authoritarian, on the model of his buddy Viktor Orban in Hungary. I'm not saying which is true, because we have no idea. I'm just saying there are forces that could go either way. Plus, if it focuses us on gun violence, that probably helps Democrats more than Republicans. So who knows? There are too many competing forces.
Raksha Andreasan says, thank you for the videos. You are someone I trust us to give the truth.
I do try to give the truth. I don't pretend to be infallible. I'm not that arrogant, but my record has held for 40 years. No other forecaster comes close. In fact, the only big forecaster to correctly predict 2016 like I did was Helmut Norpoth, who had a primary model based upon primary election results. We were the co-winners of the Steckler Award for Courage in Forecasting. But I debated Professor Norpoth, who I have a lot of respect for, about his 220 prediction. And he predicted a landslide win for guess who? Trump. In 220 with 360 Electoral College votes. Probably the worst prediction by a forecast that I've ever seen. And so I kind of stand alone now, given what's happened to Professor Norpoth.
The cheese stands alone, am I right?
Pretty much, right.
Yeah.
It's a lonely spot because I am constantly being criticized. Often, like this guy Cenk, who I debated on Young Turks, I would direct you to my scathing schooling of him. Yes.
You're pounding me. I want a pound.
Pound.
There you go. Okay.
Pound. All right. And he has people who have no idea how the keys really work, are constantly criticizing it. To understand the keys and how they, you got to read my book, because I carefully define each key and I answer whether it's true or false for every key going all the way back to 1860. So people who say, oh, your charisma key is subjective, it could be anyone. No, I very carefully define what it means to be a charismatic candidate, the once in a generation, inspirational candidate. And I've identified them since 1860, and there's very, very few of them. Who are some examples?
Me?
Yeah. William Howard Taft, Jimmy Carter, Bob Dole?
No.
Hillary Clinton? No, we know who they are. Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama in 2008.
There
aren't a lot.
I would almost argue that this assassination attempt has made Trump maybe not less charismatic, but it's just put people back in their corners. It hasn't expanded his base or expanded his voter block. In fact, I think it might have even, like I said, pushed people, again, further into their corners.
That's a perfectly reasonable explanation. It certainly has not created a whole bunch of Trump Democrats, like there were a lot of Reagan Democrats and a lot of Republicans under Franklin Roosevelt who converted to be Democrats. Let's not forget, Roosevelt won 4 elections in landslides. Reagan won 2 elections in landslides. Trump has been in 2 elections, and combined, he's lost the popular vote by 10 million votes.
Yeah, I mean, people hate his freaking guts. People hate his guts, and a lot of people hate his guts. Cameron Kerr wants you to know that he's got the live stream and the MLB All-Star Game on at the same time.
Wow, which is more interesting, Sam?
You'd have to ask him.
Yeah.
He's the one. He's the expert. He's watching both at once.
Pretty damn good.
Biden has suspended his campaign and pulled his ads over this situation. I guess the assassination attempt. Does it look like Biden will lose if that happens? I don't know if he's suspended. He might have. He rescheduled some of his events. He canceled some events and stuff. I mean, he didn't suspend.
The regular campaign will resume quickly. You know, a small suspension is not going to affect anything, but it does make Biden look good. You know, he says, I'm in respect, you know, I'm going to, for the time, suspend my ads, not campaign against Trump. On the other hand, the leading Republicans have shown no such restraint, blaming an event that has nothing to do with Biden and the Democrats, a tragedy on Biden and the Democrats. That's beyond reprehensible.
Easy Attack said, did RFK Jr. just flip the third party key true for Biden with that leaked tape? Did you hear about that? How he leaked the conversation with
Donald Trump.
And Donald Trump said that, you know, he should drop out and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't see, the vast majority of the American people paying attention to something like that. That's real inside baseball. Got to understand, most Americans don't pay this kind of close attention to politics that we do. They don't even know who their member of Congress is. Many don't even know who their senators are.
Thank you, Haitian Church, for your donation. Thank you, Gray Matters, for your donation.
Keep those donations coming.
Miles Wolf, our good friend.
Yes.
They ask, are ceasefire talks in Israel turning sour?
I'm not a foreign policy expert. Even the experts don't know. There should have been a ceasefire by now. And who's the one person that's the big obstacle to that, Sam?
Netanyahu.
Netanyahu is a disaster. He has somehow single-handedly, along with his right-wing allies, turned the entire world against the state of Israel. Israel has always occupied the moral high ground, and Netanyahu has just knocked them off that pedestal. It's a real shame. And, he keeps switching his stance on the ceasefire and hostage release, even though my understanding is the great majority of people in Israel, as well as the U.S., want to see a ceasefire and hostage release.
Give me a second. Of course, I've lost my place.
What? I thought you were young and sharp.
Yeah. YouTube really needs to fix that. I don't know why they... If you're a member, wait a little bit on asking questions. I've lost all the member questions, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
I know. But we'll get back to them.
We'll get to them.
But I just need to get back to where we were before.
Take your time. We're not losing anyone.
How do you know that?
I could sing some tunes while we're waiting.
Go ahead.
Probably not. We'd lose our audience.
No, go ahead.
No.
You sure?
Some people say a man is made out of mud. Poor man made out of muscle and blood. Muscle and blood and skin and bones. How's that?
Pretty good.
Yeah. I load 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt.
Pretty good.
Great song. Great protest song.
God damn, man. I can't even get back to the original.
Can we get more?
Funding.
Can you take new questions?
Yeah, but I don't want to miss people who've already paid.
Well, if you can't, you can't.
All right.
You just got to do what we can. We don't want to have dead air much longer.
All right. Giovanni Colantonio says, for the foreign policy failure key. With the withdrawal from Afghanistan, okay, we've talked about this many times.
That many times, and I have not called the key yet on that.
Formetta What says, in a stunning leak, RFK Jr. and Donald Trump appear to be colluding with Trump, saying, "We will win. This is a total corruption." Is he really running to manipulate the election into Trump's favor, or will he drop out, do you think?
I don't think he's going to drop out, and I do think, again, it's just my guess. I don't have any insider information. I don't have a system for this, but it does seem like he's more in line with Trump than Biden and is running to undermine the Biden vote. That's my guess.
We just got a $100 donation from Deniz Demir. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
That'll really help. Keep them coming.
Where were you when MLK was assassinated? Random question.
Trying to remember. April 4th, 1968. I had just graduated college and was beginning to attend Harvard University. I was on campus at that time. And what date was he assassinated, Sam?
On our birthday.
On our birthday, April 4th.
And we have the same birthday. People didn't know that.
Yes, we do. A little bit far apart, but the same birthday.
Luis Enrique, I think we've answered that question about the scandal.
Yep.
Has to be a corrupt action by the president. Reynaldo, we've answered social unrest and third party. Zachary says, have you heard of the popular political commentator Destiny? He has a podcast that he does on the side, and I heard his co-host mention you as a potential person to come on the podcast. Yes, I've been in contact with them, and we're trying to figure that out. Heinrich Israelian. That's quite a name.
That's a great name. I love it.
They say, will Biden's public support of term limits and changes to the Supreme Court make a difference in polling and or be successful, or to the keys?
It obviously doesn't affect the keys one way or the other. And who knows how it might affect polling, because polls are so ephemeral and so fleeting. Have I, before, Sam, also pointed out how the error in polling is much greater than they tell you?
Explain it.
Yeah. So they tell you the error in the poll typically is plus and minus 3%. You've seen that, Sam, right?
I've seen that.
Yeah. That's statistical error. That's the error you would get if you had a huge jar of red and green balls and you pulled out a sample to estimate the percentage of red and green balls in the jar. But human beings are not red and green balls, Sam.
Well,
most of them. They can lie. They may not have focused on the election. They might change their minds. Most people don't even respond to pollsters. The response rate is very low. And moreover, they have no idea who the actual voters are since no one's voted. They have to guess who the likely voters are. And every pollster has a different way of guessing. So that all those other factors impose upon the plus and minus 3% much greater error. Error, when combined, is more than enough to make the polls useless in a close election. Moreover, the additional error is not random, it's unidirectional. In 2016, the polls underestimated Republican voting strength. So, of course, like generals fighting the last war, the pollsters try to correct it. And based on 2022, the off-year elections of 2023, and the special elections of 2024, the polls now substantially underestimate Democratic voting strength. A classic example is the special election for the New York State congressional seat previously held by the disgraced George Santos. The poll taken just before the election had a dead heat. Democrat up by 1 point. The Democrat won by 8 points, outperforming the polls by 7 points. Another reason, along with all the other critiques, why you should not take the polls at face value.
Brendan Ziegler donated to tell us our stream was lagging. I apologize. We are not on my Wi-Fi right now, and there's nothing I can really do about it right now. I'll try to fix it for next time. I apologize. Thank you, Isoptera, for your donation. Jackson, we answered that question about Reagan. Formetta, we answered that question about the third party. A Mart is echoing your information about the person who tried to shoot Trump. BG the kid, so did any keys turn? No keys have turned.
The keys
right?
have not changed. They weren't changed by the Biden debate. They weren't changed by the assassination attempt and mass shooting.
Kevin Dawson says, thank you, Allan Lichtman, for being a voice of calm and rationality in a sea of emotional chaos. I gotta tell the missus you are live.
All right, thank you. I've tried.
Raynon says, you usually mention the situation in Gaza, but what should happen in Ukraine for Biden to get the military success key?
There'd have to be a major advance by the Ukrainians and a major setback for the Russians in the next 2 or 3 months.
It seems like Ukraine is a longer shot to turn the key than in Gaza, correct?
I think that's right, but you never know.
You never know. For no matter what, one of the keys being predicted after the DNC. Thank you, Kevin Dawson, for becoming a member. Paul Neese says, Professor Lichtman, thank you for your empirical approach and clarity. Do you have any good data as to whether your 13 keys model is breaking through to registered voters?
I don't have the data, but the keys model is all over the broadcast and print media throughout the United States and all over the world. To what extent it's breaking through to voters, I have no way to gauge that.
Sean P. says, is it true that U.S. Secretary of State used to be a better launching pad to the presidency than vice president? Why did this change?
That is correct. In 1824, back then, has kind of...
The Wi-Fi here is terrible. We might have just... we might be back.
As soon as we're back, wrap it up.
All right, I think we are back. I apologize. We're using... I'm not at home right now. He's not at home right now. So we're using, somebody else's Wi-Fi. So
we'll correct it Thursday.
We'll try to answer all donations in writing. And if you're a member, I'll make a special community tab where you can put your questions that weren't answered on this show. I apologize. I'm just going to have to figure this out or do a different location. So I apologize. If you can hear me, we'll be back.